DC Club Resurrects, new Grand Prix connects, and each winner reflects. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, February 2025. For our feature story, the coming of our new diplomacy year has already seen the crowning of wonderful winners from compelling competitions around the world and from various modes of play. From league championships to regional tournaments, from face-to-face gatherings to virtual events, there are winners desperately in need of being interviewed here on DBN. So later in this program, we'll show you a bevy of interviews from these folks so you can see for yourself what a diplomacy champion looks like and maybe just how you can become one yourself. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. The 2025 DBN Invitational Field of 28 players has been set, with the preliminary rounds to be played the weekend of February 21 through 23rd, and the top board happening on Saturday, March 2nd. This virtual face-to-face tournament, now in its fifth year, serves as a culmination to the global diplomacy season of 2024, with automatic bids being awarded to winners of the larger face-to-face extended deadline and virtual face-to-face events around the world, and then the remainder of the 28 spots being awarded to those who amass the most qualification points through their play during the season. The top 7 seeds for this year's event are in order: EDC and DixieCon winner Karthik Kanath of California, Australia's Jamal Blakarli, winner of the Melbourne Open, the Cane Tone Classic, and the second edition of the Gauntlet, Jordan Connors of Washington State, who won the 2024 Olympus online event, plus the Virtual Diplomacy League, Cascadia and SkyCon champ Katie Gray of New Mexico, Australia's Max Wanji-Roe Banks, winner of the inaugural Asia Pacific Championship, and Australian Open winner and defending DBNI champ Peter McNamara, also from Down Under, and then Dutch phenom Micah Bloom, who took top honors at the French Diplomacy Championship. Are you excited about this year's DBNI? You should be. Tune in for all the action right here on DBN. Board Game Geek has just announced the games inducted into its Hall of Fame for 2025, with diplomacy being at the top of their list. In conferring this honor, BGG emphasized several ways in which Alan Calhammer's creation represented an innovation in game design, including the emphasis on negotiation between the players, the simultaneous submission and adjudication of the moves from each player, and the ease with which the game could be played by mail or by staggered game sessions versus just in one sitting. Other games popular with diplomacy fans, which were also included or inducted into the BGG's Hall of Fame, include Through the Ages, Twilight Struggle, Acquire, and Civilization. Videos were released on YouTube for each of the inducted games, as well as one longer video to include all the games. We have provided the links below to the diplomacy video as well as to the longer one for all of the inductees. The 2025 North American Diplomacy Championship, called DipCon, will take place in Chicago in conjunction with the 19th annual Weasel Moot Tournament, October 3rd through 5th. The new venue has just been announced on the host Windy City Weasels website. It's the Spring Hill Suites in Park Ridge, Illinois, near the O'Hare Airport. One round will be played on Friday night, 2 on Saturday, and 1 on Sunday. Also scheduled are social gatherings and an open gaming session for the Thursday night before the tournament. Early registration is open now at $25 for students and $50 for everyone else. The event will be scored using the open tribute system, which is utilized for the Virtual Diplomacy League, with no drop round. For more information about the event, the venue, travel, and other subjects, check out the tournament website, which is linked below. Also below is a link to the website for this year's World DipCon, our hobby's World Championship for face-to-face play, being held this year in San Francisco the first weekend of April. If you have been living under a rock for the last year and thus you have not heard about this event, run, don't walk, to that website to get information on how you can attend that must-go extravaganza. During the past several episodes of Deadline, we've highlighted the growth of face-to-face club play in both Australia and the UK. This month, let's focus on the growth of club play options throughout North America. In addition to active clubs in New York City, the Triangle area of North Carolina, Los Angeles, and others, we have a new club forming in Houston, Texas. It's called Space City Diplomacy, and the club has its own Discord server with an invite link I have provided below. Also, the DC area club called the Potomac Tea and Knife Society, or PTKS, has undergone a renaissance. Here to talk to Deadline about that rebirth is Phillip Bass, who is known as Chubasa online. Well, hello there, Phillip, and welcome to DBN's Deadline.
Hey there. Really excited to be here.
Oh, you got it. Before we go any further, could you introduce yourself? Tell us, your full name, where you live, what do you do when you're not organizing diplomacy games, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Phil Bass. I live in the DMV area, or Washington, D.C., and I'm originally from Florida. And when I'm not playing diplomacy, I usually find an excuse to hang out with my friends, whether we're checking out a new place, trying out a new video game, just anything that we can do that's fun and exciting and gives something to do.
What do you do for a living?
I am a federal contractor in the government.
Got you. All right. Well, how did you get into the game of diplomacy to begin with?
One of those friends that I was talking about earlier, he was really interested in the idea of getting into diplomacy, and I tried out my first face-to-face game in 2019, and I was hooked immediately. And I got really into trying out those press games on Backstabber. And at one point, I was in like 7 random games, and I realized I had an addiction.
Well, it's the kind of addiction that you really don't want a cure for. I'm
very thankful for it.
Is there some aspect of diplomacy that makes the game particularly attractive to you?
Yeah, people. I really think that the game of diplomacy is actually relatively simple when it comes to the mechanics, but what makes the game really extraordinary is how people interact with one another, and it really elevates the game so that even if you have the same 7 people, any game can be different. And that's really an exciting place to be able to try out and to do new things.
Yeah, that's really true. The replayability of the game is almost insane when you think about it. Well, have you played the game in ways other than face-to-face club play that we're going to be talking about today? What other mode? You've already mentioned Backstabber press games. Any other ways in which you've played the game?
Yeah, actually, I'm relatively new to face-to-face gameplay. I've only ever played 4, so I'm always excited to be able to be trying this out. My most experience is through, as we discussed, press games. I did a lot of Backstabber, but I also participated in the Season 6 Nexus Press Tournament. So, that's where I've had most of my experience. So I've really loved getting a chance to experience those same things I love, but in face-to-face.
As I recall, did you make it to the main event final game?
Yes, sir, I did.
That's what I thought. You were maybe playing France, if I'm remembering this correctly?
Yes, it looks like you did your homework. I was France in that game. I don't think I did as well as I should have. And so, I can always do better. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to always find new games to do stuff with.
Well, nobody ever thinks they do as well as they should have, including people that win who sometimes think they could have played better too. So that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that attitude.
Yeah, I feel that on a spiritual level. You have to know, while we're on that subject, that whenever I had the opportunity to play as France, I was really tempted to do a whole hog intro. That was what I really walked in wanting to do, but I was just excited to be able to play the game. And so you were a direct influence for me on that. So
as I have said many times, even I think that opening is very situational and should only be used occasionally. There are people that think that I want to do that all the time. I'm like, no, it often does not work to put all 3 units on Belgium and all that. That's not always the right way to go. Well, let's talk about the PTKS for a minute, because why did you get involved in resurrecting that DC area club?
Yeah, well, as we were kind of talking about earlier, I really love the people part of diplomacy. And I found myself, especially after the Nexus tournament, really craving a diplomacy community to play with and to try out face-to-face as this fun, new, different format for me, even though it's how the game is built to be played. And so I was really excited to give it a go. And in 2021 and 2022, as the community was dormant, I was eager to take the helm. But ultimately, with the pandemic, it just wasn't quite the right time. And in December 24 of this year, community members, particularly one named Enrique, were expressing a lot of interest in resurrecting the chapter. And I was eager to take that interest and that excitement that I had a few years ago and to work really hard to resurrect it. And I'm just very thankful for the initial successes that we as a community have already had.
And for those that don't know, this is the Potomac Tea and Knife Society, a diplomacy club that was started probably 25-ish years ago and had a lot of active play, but had become more dormant lately. So tell me what you're up to now in terms of organizing games.
Yeah, a lot of that has to be kind of caveated that we only are in our first month of our revival. And as we continue to grow, I'm really excited to see how we're going to keep trying to do new and exciting things. So right now, a lot of what we're doing is relatively rudimentary. We organize monthly games in the metropolitan area of DC and just try to figure out times that work for players. We might change our format to be a bit more of just an open invitation with a consistent date. We're not sure yet. We're just excited to try new things.
And where have you been, the games that you have held so far, where have you held them specifically?
Inside of Washington, D.C., we hosted them at a local brewery. It's relatively close to me. I really appreciate the staff there, and we love being able to do it. And even if you live in the D.C. area and don't play one of our games, Lost Generation Brewing is a great place to be.
So how do you communicate with interested players in your organizational efforts?
Yeah, we communicate through 3 core principles. We use email, Meetup, and Discord. Email is for organizing day of games and for direct correspondence with different folks as needed. Meetup tends to be our public-facing opportunity to engage with folks. And then our Discord, I've really designed to be more of a community hub for players to engage and see how things are going on a more microscopic level.
How has Meetup worked in terms of successfully bringing in players from the public face?
It's great. I mean, the revived conversation that we've had has been through Meetup. And at the end of the day, no community can survive without some sort of generation of new members. So that's really been main engine there. So we hope to use Meetup as an outward facing platform to attract new members. And then the Discord is where we can retain them.
Well, give us a lowdown on what happened in your games that you have played, if you can.
Yeah. I'm a bit of a data nut, and I also have always really enjoyed the DBNI products that track how different games go through Backstabber. And so I was eager to give a similar experience for our own community. So after every game, we track the exact moves in Backstabber as we go, and then screenshot them and upload them in our Discord so people can see how they went. And as a data nut, I also really love tracking different data that we can. So in January 2025, I was tracking the different countries, and England was our lowest performing country, while Austria was the most likely to be eliminated. And then also Italy, France, and Germany have consistently our strongest performances.
You know, it's amazing when you see different groups and different clubs, different data sets, how things differ. You know, you'll have one group where Russia dominates, you'll have another group where Russia gets creamed. I mean, it's just, and of course you'll need more data to make it more relevant. You know, you'll keep it up for a bunch of, but it's fun to do. I remember when I was learning the game back in the 1980s, we kept track of the outcome of all of our games and did the same thing. We didn't have the same data tools that you have now, but just the concept of keeping that as a piece of your club's history is what is the fun part of it.
I completely agree with you. I always loved the lore that that the Weasels always open or not always, but will open like Turkey over to Armenia. But also I remember when me and my friends first started playing together, the classic go-to move was that like France would jump into Burgundy. And it was it was just a silly thing that we did, but that culture has already moved on. And it's exciting how, as more people get involved, how the replayability changes is exciting.
Sure is. All right. So when and where are your next available game days, and tell us how people get in touch with you if they want to get more information.
Yeah, our next game days are coming up. They're going to be February 22nd and 23rd in Washington, D.C. Our exact location is TBD, but by now you should have seen our event emails on Meetup and Discord. Interested players who want to get engaged should just reach out to me. We have email, we have Discord, and we have Meetup. And any of those platforms will be a great chance to get more details. And feel free to message me directly, whether you're in our Discord or you see me in another Discord that you know. And I'm really excited to get you involved and be able to engage however I can.
All right, I appreciate that. Sounds great. Let's be a little more specific. Your handle on Discord is what?
Oh, that's good. Chubasa. like Chewbacca, but with S's because my last name is Bass, like the fish.
And then there are some people that watch this that wouldn't touch Discord with a 10-foot pole. So if those people exist, what is a good email for them to contact you?
Yeah, our community has a specific Gmail. So to say it specifically, it's ptks.dmv@gmail.com.
Okay, that's great. Now, I think you've also started a scoring mechanism, or at least I think I saw something like that on your Discord. So tell us about that.
Yes, sir, we did. We did start our own local league. I thought that was a great idea for us to be able to build community and to give us all something to work towards. So throughout the year, players' top 3 scores will be counted for a 2025 or 2026 championship board. And obviously it'll be our top 7. And so we're excited to see how that plays out throughout the year. Our scoring system was really designed to be simple. And so that people who are new to the game, you can absorb it really quick and then just keep going forward. We have all of our games end at 1908 so that folks are able to not have to worry about too much of a time commitment. There's also, you get 100 points for reaching 18 supply centers or soloing. So if you deserve to do that, if you get that by 08, you deserve it. And so you have 10 points per supply center controlled, and then 1 point for each winner survive. And if the game draws, then everyone gets the full 8 expected points.
Gotcha. Well, the PTKS back in the day used to run an annual tournament, face-to-face tournament called Tempest. In fact, it ran for decades and hosted DipCon and World DipCon. Any plans for something similar in the future?
Yeah, I've heard of it, and I think it'd be awesome to do in future years. But as of right now, my priorities are to build the community and then be able to consider what initiatives we do or do not want to take in future years.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what are your plans regarding the future of PTKS as you sit here today?
Yeah, right now, I'm just super enthusiastic about building a strong community with great roots. My hope is to make sure that this first year of the community is a success, and then to be able to set ourselves up in 2026 to be able to do more ambitious things, such as reviewing how we want to manage our own local league, or whether we want to pursue Tempest, or other kinds of initiatives and creative ideas. I am just so excited for our members to decide to do.
Well, speaking for those of us that have been in the hobby a long time, I'm excited for you. I mean, the DC area has actually had 2 different clubs in the history of the hobby that were extremely important. The first one was called the Warthogs, believe it or not. And both of those clubs were absolutely crucial to the hobbies of their day. So I'm really excited. And I think I'm speaking for everyone else who's going to see this, that it's just awesome that a club presence in the DC area is back. So anything else you want to tell our audience?
Yeah, I think that you really capture a lot of the vibe. We're really excited to be shepherding in this next generation of enthusiasm and engagement. And if you live in the DC area, let me know. I'm excited to connect with you and to see how to plug you in for any diplomacy community. And if you're not in the DMV, but you're interested in a chapter, let me know. Whether you're interested in reviving one or you're interested in building a new one. I feel like I have had a lot of lessons learned from this experience, and I would be excited and enthusiastic to share that opportunity to help other people learn how to do it.
All right, Phillip, that's great. Thanks so much for being on the show, and thanks for what you're doing to resurrect face-to-face diplomacy play in the DC area.
It's my pleasure, sir. Thank you.
The 2025 European Grand Prix competition has just been announced on the French diplomacy site called Diplomania. The goal is to connect players across national boundaries and to reward and encourage excellent play throughout the calendar year. The EGP will combine results from face-to-face tournaments from around the continent with those from the 2 virtual face-to-face leagues which are based in Europe, the Tour of Britain and the 7 Years' War. This project also encourages organizers to prioritize positive player experiences by instituting a code of conduct and suggesting that the appointment of well-being officers for players. Scoring for the Grand Prix takes into account 3 different tiers of events, from the top tier, such as World DipCon or the European Diplomacy Championship, and then the middle tier featuring national championship events, and the lower tier for secondary tournaments within a country or region. For more information on the format and rules governing the 2025 EGP, see the link provided in our show notes. The first event in this Grand Prix has just finished over the second weekend in February, with Gunter Bedson taking home the title from the 2025 SpireCon, held in Chesterfield, England. Participants described him as a smart and funny diplomat who is a pleasure to be around, so his victory was a popular one. Toby Harris came in second, with third place going to Bradley Grace. Now, this just in, the first event on the 2025 Asia Pacific Tour has also already occurred. It took place in Bangkok in late January, with Australian Ken Gordon of the Diplomacy Games podcast taking the top spot of that tournament. From the online extended deadline world, I'm pleased to announce that the Duplicity website is back up and running, both classic and variant games of diplomacy. With the Conspiracy Android app having gone away last fall and the exodus from Play Diplomacy after the hack of that site destroyed its forum, it is good for online players to have another choice for their dip fix. Web diplomacy is, of course, also still going strong, as is the Backstabber platform that we use for most tournaments here on DBN. But the more the merrier, with Duplicity back in the picture, at least in its web-based form. You can use the link below to sign into Duplicity, and happy stabbing. As we enter into another season of face-to-face play throughout the world, let's report on the details of two upcoming events. On the weekend of May 10th and 11th, the Netherlands Diplomacy Championship will take place at the event space located in the Lust restaurant in Groningen. Jelte Kuiper will once again be in charge of this tournament, which consists of 2 rounds on Saturday and 1 on Sunday using the C-Diplo Namur scoring system. There's also a dinner and social event scheduled for that Friday night before. A number of housing options are available to con attendees at various price points, with more information available using the link we have provided below. Later that month, the 39th annual DixieCon tournament will take place in Chapel Hill, North Carolina over Memorial Day weekend. Those dates are May 23rd through 25th, with 1 diplomacy game scheduled for each of those 3 days. Housing options and more event details can be found at www.dixiecon.com. As we report periodically here on Deadline, the game of diplomacy is often referenced in the academic press worldwide, as the game routinely forms the basis for research into fields such as game theory, computer learning, history, and negotiation skills. This month, we report on a recent paper from 4 scholars at the Bar-Ilan University in Israel in conjunction with the California-based nonprofit research institute SRI International. The paper is entitled Explaining Decisions of Agents in Mixed Motive Games. It will be presented at the 39th annual AAAI Conference on Artificial Intelligence in Philadelphia. The field of AI has been particularly rich ground for diplomacy-related research in recent years, as we all know. This latest project is focused on how to explain the behavior of AI agents as they navigate 3 different gaming environments, one of which being gunboat diplomacy. The key factor being studied here is the relationship between the cooperation and competition motivations, the intersection of which can be particularly difficult to navigate for any game actors in diplomacy, whether they be human or artificial. A link to the paper is found below for your convenience. And now it's time for the segment of our show we call the Winner's Circle. Last month, the top boards for both the Virtual Diplomacy Championship and the Virtual Diplomacy League were played, with dramatic consequences for the participants and for those who were watching on DBN. The finalists on the VWDC top board were Bradley Grace, Jason Gray, Jamal Blakarli, Noam Brown, Jason Bennett, Katie Gray, and the winner, Jackson Roberts. For the VDL, Jordan Connors took the title over the rest of that top board, which included Christopher Ward, Justin Lohr, Ben Kelman, Michalis Kamarites, Matthew Tatanchi, and another appearance by Jamal Blakarli. In face-to-face news, the 2025 North American circuit is off and running with a Cascadia event the first week in February in Vancouver, producing David Miller of Maryland as its champion, with Harjat Guram of British Columbia and Greg Matthews of Washington State coming in second and third. So let's check in with each of the 3 winners to find out just how they did it, starting with Washington's Jordan Connors. Jordan Connors, it's great to have you back here on Deadline.
I'm sorry, who are you?
Yeah, the name is actually on the screen, but
Right.
we're not here to talk about me, which is a good thing for the audience. We're here to talk about you. You have won the 2024 Virtual Diplomacy League Championship. So before we get to that and talk about some of those things, there may be a few people out there who are not already Jordan Connor groupies. And so they don't know you. Tell us where you're located and what you do when you're not playing diplomacy.
Sure. So I live in Seattle. I'm a trial lawyer. I am a husband and parent of 2. I spend most of my time coaching my son's basketball team. That's where most of my mental focus is. And occasionally I play a game or 2 of diplomacy in the background.
So as far as the basketball goes, how's the season going? What have you got in terms of your front court? Give me some information here.
Yeah, it's going well. We're 2-2, but we played hard. We have a big game tomorrow that's going to kind of set the course of the season. Both my kids run track, so I am out in the field scouting all the time, and I'm able to kind of loop in some of the better athletes in the city. So we're putting it together. Thank you for asking. I actually think it would be great if DBN would cover some of our games. There is treachery, excitement, definitely competition. So we can talk about that after the interview.
Yeah, I will certainly pass along that very sensible and logical request to the DBN powers that be. But let's go back to diplomacy. Describe a little bit, if you would, of your diplomacy background, like how long you've played and sort of the venues and formats you've played in the past. Tell us a little bit about your diplomacy history.
Sure. It's pretty simple. I started playing at a website called Play Diplomacy. That's where I really played. That's where I learned to play and played most of my games. And then when that community kind of shifted to doing tournaments on Nexus or Olympus, I have basically been playing in whatever tournaments they've been running for the last few years. I only started playing virtual in the last year with the VDL and with the VDC tournament they had. So I'm kind of testing that out a little bit, but mostly I played press.
What makes your diplomacy brain tick?
What makes it tick? I mean, I seek collaboration. I think the game is about finding mutual goals and working towards them. So for me, I am just kind of running around frantically trying to find somebody to collaborate with.
I'm just picturing you wandering around, running around frantically.
Collaborate with me.
Please work with me. All right. Well, let's go to the VDL Championship. Now, you mentioned that you had been doing virtual for, roughly a year or so. Why did you decide to get into virtual play, the VDC or the VDL?
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover, right? So a lot of the people I've been playing with at Olympus or Nexus have been playing VDL. There is, as you might appreciate, an incredible amount of self-aggrandizement in the virtual community. There's television, there's interviews, there's sideline reporting. It's really an incredible infrastructure built up around it. So I was just curious, if I could compete there, and obviously enjoyed a lot of the people and wanted to try it out.
Can you compete there? Answer, yes. Before we get to that championship that you won on the top board, let's talk about your VDL season up to the end of the end of the year tournament. Describe your experiences playing in the VDL during the season.
Sure. It was somewhat miserable, mostly because I struggle with the schedule. My weekends are almost entirely devoted to my children. So I could find time to play when I was free, but it was only at about midnight until 6 a.m. my time. So that was a struggle. The games went well, and I was able to come through onto the top board. I really kind of just tried one in the beginning to see what it was like, and it went well. And then I kind of felt like, okay, I got to play a couple more and see if I can make the big one. So that's what I did. But the timing was rough.
Yeah, I remember you playing in some rough time zone kind of games, but you played at least 3. I think you maybe just played 3 rounds. I can't remember now how many rounds you played. It was 3 or 4, and made it to the top board anyway, even though lots of people played more rounds than you did during the season. What did you think your chances were going into the top board? Be honest.
I felt like I had as good a chance as anybody. I hadn't played with many of the players. I think I'd only played with one of them like one time. So I didn't know a lot about the competition. But I felt good. I felt good. I think the game of diplomacy is pretty much the same. It's not pretty much the same. It's very similar if you're playing face-to-face or virtual or press. The same things translate and help. And so I felt like I had as good a chance as anybody.
You ended up playing Italy on the top board, as I recall. And, you know, for some people, that's like, yay, I love that country. And there are other people tell you, oh, I have to play Italy. Where do you fall in that continuum?
I was happy to play Italy. It's definitely growing on me. I think it can be really good on the top board because Italy is a country where you can really say, you can accept somebody else's plan and kind of go with the flow. You don't have to be driving. And I think that was very helpful and kind of aligned with the way I wanted to approach the game.
How did those early relationships go in the East and in the West for you as Italy?
Beginning went really well. I think the most important part was I spoke with Matt and asked him if he'd rather attack Wardy or Jamal in Austria and Turkey. And he said that he'd really rather attack Jamal. And I was happy with that. And that kind of set the course of the way the early game began.
And by Matt, you mean the player playing Russia, for those that may not remember the game specifically, the Russian player.
Fair enough. Thanks. So Matt Tatanci in Russia. So I was in Italy and, kind of said, hey, I think we ought to focus our powers together on somebody. Where do you want to go? And so he kind of set the course of the beginning of the game.
So how did that alliance structure shake out for you as the game progressed there in the East? And you said went along with Russia wanting to attack the Turks and got the Austrians involved, but at some point 3 must become 2. So what happened?
Yeah. Okay. So disaster struck in the second year of the game. So we were 3 of us, Austria, Italy, and Russia, attacking Turkey. And I think Russia had some pressure in the north. And so we really wanted to get him a build. And it was actually my move set, my idea, the way we were going to approach the attack on Jamal in Turkey. And the disaster was that it totally succeeded. We got all 3 in the same move, and I was boxed out of all of them. So at the same time, Justin in France knocked a fleet down into the Mediterranean to say hello. And so all of a sudden I had no reason to have any units in the East. I was boxed out of Turkey. I had a big problem on my West Coast. And so the issue was that I was going to have to send all my units that way. And I couldn't talk to Wardy and Matt in Russia and Austria and say, hey, remember we were all going to divide up Turkey. What about getting me a dot? That was just totally off the table. And I had to send everything west, and my win equity was very low.
I remember watching the game as it progressed, thinking the same thing, like, oh man, what does Jordan do here? But Jordan did something. So what did Jordan do to turn things around?
Yeah. So I had to focus everything on defending against Justin in France. And I just sort of set up a bad stalemate that he was defeating slowly but surely. And then, the key was to get other folks to attack Justin. So I made a deal with Germany, McCallis, to go do that. That was critical. That's kind of typical, I think, on a top board, that there'd be that sort of balance of power play. And then I just had to kind of find every excuse I could to head east. I knew that I couldn't just follow after Justin when he kind of retreated from his attack, because McCallus in Germany would end up getting most of those dots if I did that. So I just sort of looked for every excuse I could find to kind of nudge my way back east, which is eventually what gave me the supply centers that I needed to win.
So what was the opportunity to sort of strike ahead of everyone, to strike and go ahead of everybody else? What was that opportunity?
So there were a few things, but one of the key ones was that McCallus had sent a unit into the Tyrolia, Bohemia area to just kind of police us in the east and make sure nobody was growing too fast. And there was a turn where I could have blocked him out of Tyrolia so that he didn't have access to any of the centers in northern Italy and Austria. And I chose not to do that because it was going to provide an excuse to me to move my centers eastward in order to cover up Venice and Trieste. So it was just looking for little things that would serve as a reason for me to put my units where I needed to have them.
You needed a pretext, as we say in the law.
That's exactly what I needed, David.
Okay,
yes.
And you got one. All right. So how did you take advantage of that? What happened to allow you to take that, to make that move that gave you the game?
Yeah. So as it progressed, I found a reason to head that way. Then disaster struck again. Wardy stabbed me. He took Trieste and, had a plan to knock me out. Okay. Fortunately, it was on the same turn that Russia had attacked him. And so I think he felt very regretful of the move, and he wanted to reverse it immediately. And I think it put him in a mindset where I had been a loyal and true ally in that I hadn't attacked him, and we had worked together in Turkey, and I didn't ask, hey, what about Smyrna? After I got kind of boxed out. He had stabbed me and it didn't work out because he got attacked at the same time. And so I think it put him in a mindset where he wanted to sort of undo. He had made a mistake and wanted to undo that. And with the way the momentum worked at the end of the game, that just sort of carried me across into centers in the East that just by the skin of my teeth got me into the tie for the lead.
The way you're describing this almost makes me think this game is mostly psychological instead of a war game where you move pieces around. Am I thinking right?
You read my mind. That's what it's about. It's so little about the pieces. It's so much about the relationships, especially on a board like this where everybody's really good. Everybody wants it. If someone gets out to a lead, they're going to be checked. My strategy going in was to build relationships, not center counts. So it's just about putting something in the bucket of all the players near me. And I did it with Jamal. We all attacked Jamal. I told him every turn I'm attacking him. And I just think that ended up really helping in the end, just because I had people on my side when I needed them.
You do things during the game to build up your psychological bank account with the other players, and then you cash it in if you can at the end to help you, is the way I'm hearing it. And I think that's could not be more right about how to play any game, but particularly a top board game.
I have been at the end of enough of these games where, in a past life, I didn't have anything in the bank account. I took advantage of every chance I could to elbow out somebody just a little bit. And it's just a really bad long-term play. And so I guess that's something I've learned, that you're just not going to win games where you're really going to count on people in the end playing that way.
I was going to ask you what people might be able to take away from this game that you won in terms of lessons, those that are watching this or may go back and watch the coverage or watched it live? And what do you, besides what we just talked about, are there any other lessons you think that one could take from watching that particular outcome?
Well, that's the big one. I think there is definitely a lesson of don't give up. The board changes on a dime. I couldn't have been more out of it in the middle of the game. I mean, it wasn't just I was down to 4. It was that none of the pieces were in the right place. My pieces were all defending against France. Everybody was caving in on me. It was just not a good picture. But the board, especially in a game like this, has a way of adjusting to counter that. And so spending time making sure you have the relationships is just what's critical, and don't give up.
That sounds like really good advice in general. Any shout outs you want to make regarding the other players in the game or anything like that?
Yes, I will take the players in turn. Jamal, never change. I've learned a ton from you. I have a lot of respect for you. I like where our relationship is. Wardy, don't listen to Brandon Fogel ever. I think you are a really, really strong ally, and you are a delightful person, like Santa Claus level delightful. Don't ever change. Tatanchi, you are solid like an oak tree, and that is the highest level compliment I can give. Don't ever change. McCallus, you'll always be a fake cop throwing oranges to me. He knows what that means. Don't ever change. Ben, you took a risk and played for the win. Respect. Don't ever change. Justin, you are the Paul Muad'Dib of the diplomacy hobby. You will rise up and lift us into the next century of this hobby, and I'm here for it. Don't ever change.
I'm hearing a lot of don't change. Do you think that anybody should change? And if so, who is that person that should change? No. You've said a lot of good things about a lot of people. Who is that person out there that needs to change? And what does that change look like? David
knows the answer to this question. David, you are a dark, small, old human being. You have a lot of work to do. Everybody in the audience knows it. I don't need to call out any more of your particular issues.
Man, you really sound like you've been talking about wife. Have you been talking about wife about me? Because this sounds very familiar to
me. We all know what I'm talking about.
Fair enough. All right. Will we see you at the San Francisco DipCon in early April?
I have my hotel room booked.
I'm sorry, World DipCon. I misspoke. World DipCon in early April. So you have your hotel room booked?
I'm going to be there.
Awesome.
I think I'm going to try to be there.
That is great news. And Jordan, all kidding aside, congratulations on your VDL victory. It's well deserved. And we hope to see you playing this coming season as well.
Thank you. It was a blast. I want to do one more shout out. I did a lot. One more. I want to thank Zach Moore. He poured his heart and soul into this league. 5 years between setting up DBN and just reacting to 1,000 pings on Discord about setting up games and establishing this thing. I think it's an incredible thing that he built with others, but he's the one who is stepping down, and I just think deserves a lot of credit and praise. So thank you.
That is a great point. Thank you, Jordan, for that, and thank you for being on Deadline.
Thank you.
And now in our next Winner Circle segment, we talk to the latest Virtual Diplomacy Championship winner, Jackson Roberts of California. Hello, Jackson Roberts, and welcome to Deadline.
Hello. Good to be here, David.
Sure. All right. Let's start by giving us a little diplomacy bio on you. How did you get into the game? What keeps you coming back to the game? That sort of thing.
So I got in the game first when I was around 16 years old in my dad's world history class, where we played the variant colonial diplomacy, which is the board of Asia. And then when the pandemic hit, we started looking for online ways to keep ourselves entertained, and Backstabber was one of those ways that we started playing. And then after a very good alliance that my dad kept with another player, he introduced us to the Discord version of diplomacy, and we have been off and on playing in tournaments ever since. And I just love the game. The friendships, the complex states of boards, it'll always have me coming back.
Yeah, there's just so much complexity to it. Even at my age, I still keep learning new things about how the game can be played, should be played, is being played. It's amazing. So where are you physically located, and what do you do when you're not playing diplomacy?
So I live in Anaheim, California. I'm about 2 blocks away from Disneyland, and I work at Disneyland as a dancer in their parade offerings. Sometimes as some of those characters that you love, sometimes as just myself.
Who is also a character that we love. So, all right. So before we talk about your VDC title, what do you think of virtual face-to-face as a mode of play? I mean, obviously you didn't start playing that way. So what do you think about that as a mode of play?
I've really grown to like virtual face-to-face. I think it brings a great possibility of growth to the game. I think it reaches a lot of people who the game otherwise wouldn't reach. And of course, I struggle a little bit with our with the extended deadline press. It feels like more time to dedicate to the game, even if I'm dedicating technically less because it's not all at once. And I really like that it's gotten me the ability to connect with people who I otherwise would not meet at in-person tournaments. And that's been really fun for me.
Well, and you recently played all three of those types of modes of play we just described: virtual, physical face-to-face, and online press games. Do you think being successful in one of those formats is different from being successful in other forms of play?
For sure. I think that there's information that's available to you in all three of them that's not available in any other one. In virtual play, it's a lot easier to keep track of who's talking to who, how long are they talking, and what might be those conversations happening. It's a lot easier to connect with everybody. And in person, it feels a lot more hectic. It's really, really difficult to keep track of who's talking to who while you're trying to have your own conversations. And even then, usually you aren't looking at a board while you're having those conversations. So you're doing a lot of that from memory or from a picture. And then in, of course, press, you get a lot more time to think about what you're doing, a lot more time to think about what you're saying, who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, and the kinds of things that you're going to tell them, which also means that there's more time to second guess what you're doing and go back and forth on those kinds of things. So it feels a lot more built, the strategies that you're doing. And I think that all of those things make each of them a unique kind of game. And just because you have success in one definitely doesn't translate to success in another.
Wait, so you think you rethink things and second guess yourself? Is that what I'm hearing? Come on, surely you don't.
Especially when I'm playing press.
You seem so confident.
Well, I don't have time in virtual face-to-face or in-person tournaments to second guess anything.
That's fair. All right, so a few weeks ago, we had a weekend of preliminary rounds for the Virtual Diplomacy Championship. So what was your frame of mind going into that weekend of the preliminary rounds?
Yeah, so I knew that this was really the only tournament that I was playing in this entire year. I hadn't gotten much of a chance to play diplomacy from January to December, and I just so happened to have this weekend entirely off. So I came in knowing that if I wanted to repeat making the DBNI, I was going to have to win this tournament. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about that. This was the one, and I had to get first. So that really was what I came in with. I knew that I needed to win, and that was the goal.
Man, that's a lofty goal that you succeeded in. What were you confident that you had a chance to do that?
I think since probably 2021, I've felt like entering a tournament, there was a chance that I could win. I don't think that anyone who necessarily plays diplomacy feels like they're going to win a tournament, but they feel like they can give themselves the opportunity to be in the conversation at the end or to have a chance to get there in the end. And I've really felt that way about a lot of the games that I've played for the last 2 or so years.
Since you started playing virtual several years ago to now, do you think do you think you've changed the way you play virtual?
Oh, goodness. I think that I have changed a lot in my style of play, in how I talk, in my tactics. Not only have I learned so much about this game in the last 5 years, which seems like a pretty short amount of time of playing diplomacy, especially when I talk within this community. But I mean, I was 18 years old when I joined the hobby. I played my first tournaments a few months after becoming an adult. I was young, I was aggressive, I was, some would say, stab happy. I've really, really calmed down over the last couple of years. I've learned that a lot can be earned in patient diplomacy play, and that there's a lot of merit to extremely strong alliance style play. Even if it doesn't end up with the best result on every board, it ends up with significantly better results on more boards.
Well, give us a taste of how those early rounds went for you. What stands out?
So, of course, I played most rounds of this tournament. I did not get to play the midnight rounds on Saturday or Sunday, not because I wasn't there, but because there weren't enough people to start a second board. And of course, I had played as many boards as someone could. So some of my boards did not go well at all. Two of them particularly, I was eliminated from one in a poor game for myself, and I played a small Italy in a game that I might as well have been playing Gunboat. But that shared top and those two board tops, at most times during the game, I really felt like I knew what was happening on every side of the board. I was being very active in every conversation that I was having with every player, and I felt like I knew what was going to go down from the east to the west and everywhere in between. And that felt really good as a diplomacy player. It feels good to see the moves that you think are happening on the board. I had great alliances. I had great people on both sides of the board who were willing to tell me what was going on. So I built some great relationships. And then I was able to create strong alliances from people who probably should have blamed me for not having done well in that game, whether it was because I attacked them from 1901 or because the way that our alliance had ended up being structured, they ended up losing most of their centers. And so that relationship style gameplay, which hasn't necessarily been my gameplay style for the last few years, was really what I was focused on. Having good relationships and going out and talking to as many people, even if I wasn't working with them, as best I could.
Makes sense. All right. Well, obviously you were able to make it to the top board, which means you were going into the Paris method of power selection. With what thinking, what strategy in your head for the Paris method or for the game in general?
So with a week in between and knowing that I was coming in first place, I knew that I was going to be working with as much information as anyone was by the time that we got to power selection. I still have my little cheat sheet here. I drew up just about every way that I thought the Paris method could go. Who would end up in what selections, what countries I thought they would select, what openings they usually do in those countries, because we have a backlog of Backstabber games in the DBN network and also on Backstabber. You can look at those things. So I knew that I was only going to play France, England, or Italy. I was never going to take a different power. So I knew that I was either picking first, third, or fourth. I knew that I would pick first if Jamal was in that first slot. And I knew that I would pick third if Bradley was in the second slot because I didn't want to play England to his Russia. I knew that I would pick fourth if neither of them were there because I would have been okay with Italy or England in that situation because I would have been fine with the alliances on either side. So I really, really studied.
That sounds like a lot. I mean, that's heavy analysis.
So I felt extremely prepared going into that Paris selection, and I felt really good about who was where and what I was going to do in that situation.
And so you ended up playing England. And in the early stages of the game, I'm not sure things were going according to plan, or am I misreading things?
You're 100% correct. I mean, those first 3 years, of course, felt great. As in England, you love to get a one-build Germany and a France who builds the army and has gone to Burgundy. Like, we bounced Holland. It was going great. I pitched that in 1901 and it worked. And then there was this conversation that I had with Jamal and with Noam. And I had these separately, but I was in the kind of position where if they had both worked together, there was the opportunity for them to go to NAO and Channel and take Holland and take Norway from me. And we had made a deal where this wasn't going to happen and things were going to work out pretty okay for me. But it meant that I was bouncing NAO, so I couldn't do anything about Norway. And I wasn't going to do anything about English Channel. And I had no control here. And so with a bunch of different technical issues, we ended up having a 30-minute break here. And in those 30 minutes, I lost my mind over this idea that if I got stabbed, I was out of the game entirely. And so that wasn't apparently what was going to happen. But then I went back and I said, hey, you two, we need to change these orders. I need to be safer in this. So on that turn, when I lose Holland, there's a bunch of orders that changed at the last minute that ended up in me getting stabbed, where Gnome has this NAO fleet and a pretty big advantage on me. So things were definitely not going my way at that time.
That certainly didn't seem that way. Now, how did it turn around in the mid game for you, though?
I think a lot of things happened. The big one is that I really focused on spending as much time with Germany and as much time with Russia as possible. I knew that France was not going to beat me in England on his own. I wasn't going to lose that tactical war if it was just him.
Because he didn't have the fleet strength, for one thing, right?
Yes. He didn't have the safety from Italy not having to go towards him if he did make that move. And so spending a lot of time with Germany and Russia, I know we're on a top board. You can't let France get the island. Then he's on 9 and he just wins. So trying to eke out every bit of information. So they gave me all of France's orders every single turn. It's part of the reason why I never lost a guess. But then I can then go back to France and say, hey, this isn't working. Notice how it's not working. They're telling me everything. And the big one was, as the broadcast was upset about, Germany building Army Berlin instead of Fleet Berlin, which kind of put him out of that idea of ever attacking me. Right. It meant that Germany was only going to go after France. And that was kind of the moment where I went to Gnome and I said, hey, this hasn't worked. It's not going to work. Let's figure this out. Let's do something to push in different directions. They clearly aren't taking your side. I've tried to work with you. I was a good ally in the beginning. And I really think it was 3 years of not having any good conversations with another power on the board that made him feel like that was the only choice.
You know, that's the perils of not having extended or continued conversations if you're Russia, if you're Germany, if you're Italy, whatever the situation was with the French player, right?
Yeah, when you see someone who gets really powerful, a lot of times in diplomacy games, we will team up against them. And in that teaming up, we sit in channels and say, nobody wants to talk to that player because then that makes everybody else stressed. But if you don't talk to that player gets stressed, and nobody's eliminated from this board yet, except for maybe Bradley Grace. Bradley Grace might have been eliminated from this board.
Yeah, he was in a little bit of dire straits there at that point. Well, you know, I would say diplomacy at the highest levels is mostly about relationship building, negotiation, maintenance of that relationship. Because everyone in a top board is going to know how to move the pieces around. So how important do you think relationships were in understand for those of us on the outside looking in to understand how the game ended?
I think that this game came down to a 50-50 split of relationships and beyond this top board goals. And I don't necessarily mean relationships from before the game. I think I've played one game with Gnome ever, and we weren't in an alliance together. This wasn't like we've built a bunch of rapport, and so it felt good for me to win.
But you mean relationships within the game?
Yeah. Inside this game specifically, the conversations that were happening, how people felt about different things. I think that Germany blamed Gnome more for what happened than he blamed me for bouncing him in Holland. And I think that's because I told him I was going to bounce him in Holland in 1901. I said it. That's not normal. And every move with Jamal, I told him everything that I was doing. He was aware of where I was going and what I wanted. And so balancing that and having those conversations constantly, and most importantly, not lying about any of the things that I was doing, even if they weren't the nice thing to do to that player at the time, is why I feel like I went in towards the end of this game with more than just Gnome on my side. And even then, the reason he was on my side is because he felt dejected by the rest of the board. And having those conversations is so important to having people be on your side at the end.
And a lot of times winning the game happens because people don't mind if you win, right? I mean, that's what you're looking to do, is for people to be, okay, we're fine if Jackson wins.
Yeah, and I think that, of course, that it wasn't all 6 people on this board who were happy for me to win, but there were a good 3 or 4 that at the end seemed like it was okay for me to get this one. And even then, part of those tactics around France were to make it so that people would be more okay with me winning, and in not a 14 center board top like I don't really think should happen on top boards.
Well, all things being equal, which the problem is that things are rarely that equal, or sometimes can't be that equal. Well, let me ask you a sort of a specific question here. There was discussion during the game and after the game about throwing and throwing to someone to win, counter throwing so someone else would win. It's some debate about whether that actually was happening, and if it was happening, was that an acceptable way to play? What is your view? I'm going to put that aside for a minute. Say from your point of view, what goals should a player pursue on a top board or really any game where it appears that that player is not going to win or not going to top the board? What goals should that person play for?
This is something I've struggled with my whole career in this diplomacy hobby, is that I am personally of the opinion that you should always play for the lowest possible result for every single person on the board if you are not going to win. That includes the person in first. Of course, I am well known by Ed Sullivan to have made an argument for why you should throw me a solo, because it means everybody else gets 0 and that increases your tournament chances of beating them. But personally, I think that my highest score in a game is the most important thing to me. I have not really been a player who is willing to say, well, this person made me really angry, so I just want them to lose. I don't think that that's beneficial for me ever. I don't think it's beneficial as a gameplay strategy. And I don't think it increases the health of the game on any board. I think that people make decisions that they view are their best possible options at every given moment, and sometimes that hurts someone else, and that hurts them consistently. I know that managing how much you lie to someone is important, because you don't want someone to throw the game to someone else. But I also think that sometimes lying to someone every single turn is just part of the game. And if you've lied to me from 1901 to 1907, I'm not really going to hold that against you. So personally, I think that every player always has a shot to win a board until it's the final 3 years. I think if you're on 2 centers, you can get to 7. Should you? Probably not, but you can, and you should play for that. That's my opinion. So I think in every position that I was in on this board, I was on 4 centers and dead in the water to a France who was in NAO. And at that time, I thought in my head, this is going to be a really hard game to win. But I thought I was going to win it still. I never thought there's no way that I can win this game. I'm behind by 3. There's huge alliances on the board. So I'm playing for the win. On 1 center, on 2 centers, on 10 centers. I'm playing for the win. And I think that everyone should do that at all times.
I'm hearing Jim Valvano, who you probably don't know who that is. I'm hearing that in my head. Never give up. Never give up. That was his thing right before. He was a basketball coach for NC State. But at some point, it maybe during those last 3 years, it can become very clear to someone they're not going to win. Sometimes even before that, they're down to 2 centers and in a situation where they don't think they could ever come back. Your argument is they should be playing either to minimize everyone else's score or to maximize their own score, some version of that, whatever the scoring system is, some version of that scenario.
Yes, absolutely. I think the big defense on this board in particular is that a result in this tournament was largely dictated by how well you did on the top board. When your score on the top board is doubled compared to every other board in the game, you can go from 5th to 3rd or 2nd very easily just by getting 2nd or 3rd on this board. And so when your tournament life seems over and first place seems impossible, making a deal to get 3rd or 2nd on the board feels pretty good, especially when it means that you're going to jump from getting 5 DBNI points to getting 40. And that can be a big difference when the cutoff this year is in the 60s to 70s. And I will say, Gnome was one of those guys who was about 30 to 40 points out of the DBNI. And with seemingly no chance to win this tournament, making a deal to guarantee third place that gets you a pretty good shot at making what is a goal for a lot of players to play in at the end of the year, that seems like a pretty good deal to me. And I do think that, again, 50% of this game came down to something that wasn't a part of this game at all, or this tournament even.
Well, and that's not completely unusual, but so I appreciate your view on that, and you have the best view of anyone having played and won the game on how that played out in this situation. Any other final thoughts from you about the VDC, other than, of course, thanking Johnny Gillum and all the other crew for helping to put it on, which was a big undertaking.
Absolutely thank them. 7 boards is hard. We had a ton of players show up. We had a ton of new players show up. Special shout out to my roommate who played a game just because we needed another player who's never played a diplomacy game in his entire life. Jumping into this community on a board and a tournament is hard. And also all the other players that I got to play with. It was great meeting people. I've had some great conversations post this tournament, just over Discord, about strategy and about those kinds of things. It's been great. And yay, I'm so glad to have won my first tournament after 5 or 6 second place finishes.
We are also happy to see you do it. Are we going to see you at the San Francisco DibCon in early April?
I had plans to be there. Unfortunately, this year is not going to work out for me. I have other plans that weekend. I will be in Alabama celebrating with my sister. It's her parents' weekend, and my parents now live in Italy, so I'll be filling in for them for that weekend.
Well, that is an excused absence, if I must, if you need one. That is definitely excused absence. Jackson, thanks so much for being here on Deadline, and good luck in your next tournament.
Thank you so much.
And finally, for Winner's Circle, our 2025 Cascadia winner, David Miller, talks about his win at Cascadia. David Miller, hello and welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Sure. All right. For those who may not know you, tell us where you are geographically and also what you do when you're not playing diplomacy.
Well, I'm in Catonsville, Maryland, which is just outside of Baltimore. So come visit. It's great this time of year. When I'm not doing diplomacy, I am running triathlons. I have a business where we take people on biking and backpacking trips. So when I'm not in a basement of a hotel playing diplomacy, I'm usually outside.
That's probably a good mixture. Things for your brain and things for the rest of your body. All right. So you've been involved in the hobby for a long time now, particularly on the face-to-face side of things. So give us a little of your diplomacy history.
Sure. I learned diplomacy from my good friend, Chris Martin. He was on the triathlon team at Maryland with me. And then he invited me to play some fun board game at his friend Peter Jurgen's house. So they taught me how to play. They took me to DixieCon, where they both proceeded to solo on me. And then I was addicted. So I guess it wasn't too bad. So since then, I try to go to at least 3 tournaments a year, face-to-face, mostly on the East Coast. And I know you won't hate that I'll say DixieCon's my absolute favorite. So you always see me there.
Now, you don't have to say that just because you're here on my show. But let's talk about you for a minute. Is there an aspect of your game that you feel strongest in? And then is there an aspect of your diplomacy game that you feel like you're not as strong in?
That's a good question. I think my strength,
I know it is.
you wrote it, so it must be good. So I think my strength, especially right now, is playing with the players and not just playing the game. And when I say that, I mean understanding everyone's motivation and trying to negotiate your way into a win-win scenario for everybody. And that doesn't necessarily mean you always have the most dots. That doesn't necessarily mean you're winning by a large margin. But the biggest thing I've done this year that I think's been very successful is, how can I end this game with all the other, or as many of the other players on the board, smiling and saying, man, I had a great time playing with David and playing the game. So I think that's really my strength right now, is when you top a board and everyone else is happy with you, what can be better than that, right?
Yep.
I think the weaker part of my game right now is sometimes being too nice, and that's when I should go for things, and maybe I don't. It's cost me a tournament here and there, but I think in the long run, the game is more about relationships and building a reputation that you're a fun person to work with and you're a good person to work with. So hopefully it'll pay off, even though sometimes it costs me a tournament.
Do you consider yourself an alliance player? And if you do, what does that mean to you?
100% I'm an alliance player. It means you find someone you can trust in the game that you don't need to watch your back too much with. And it allows both of you to achieve your objectives. So sometimes for some people that might be, hey, I'm trying to get a best country this tournament. Sometimes it's, I've never topped a board. I'd like to top a board. Or sometimes it's, I'm trying to win this tournament. How do I get there? And so having an alliance player doesn't necessarily just mean we're going to have the same number of dots. We're going to advance at the same pace. It means how can we all achieve our goals together?
So let's talk about Cascadia. You've just won the 2025 edition of that long-running tournament near Vancouver. And I know you've been there before, I think. So tell us your history with Cascadia, first of all.
Sure. So I think 2 years ago was the first time I went. I'm really good friends with Riaz Varani. So shout out to Riaz. Him and I are both interested in real estate, and that's how we got connected. We actually had never met, and he said, hey, why don't you come out to Cascadia? And so I did, and I just had an absolute blast. And kind of similar to Peter and Chris, he won the tournament. So that was fun. I went again last year for DipCon, North American DipCon. And then this year I came back, and I'm not sure if I'm making it next year. So it was nice to go out on top.
It really is. All right, walk us through this is a 3-round tournament. Walk us through the 3 rounds of the tournament for you, if you would, please.
Sure. And the first round was my most successful round. So I had Liam in England, I was France, and then Andrew Zick in Germany. And so right out the bat, Andrew came up to me, said he wanted to work together. I was very amenable to that. Was able to convoy an army onto the island very early in the game, and it set me up for a lot of success. And then Mike Moore was down in Italy. He actually misordered in 01 and didn't build anything. He tried to build a fleet in Tunis. And I was able to leverage that by going to Mike and say, hey, I'm not going to, as France, jump down your throat. Tell me what you need. I'll give you some space. And he really gave me the space the rest of the game to be able to do what I needed in the north. And to what I was saying earlier, I got to 10. That game, maybe not so much play left, depending on how you look at it. But no one was upset. Well, Liam might have been a bit upset at me for convoying to the island, but I had a really happy Italy. My partner in Germany, Andrew, was happy. And so I decided just to draw the game there and take the board top and move on.
And not burn any bridges again, maybe except for Liam Stokes, but who cares about Liam Stokes? Or was it Liam Stokes or was it other Liam?
Liam Stokes.
Yeah.
Stokes. Yeah.
Okay. And who cares about Liam Stokes? So what do you tell us about the second round?
Well, in the second round, I cared a lot about Liam Stokes because I was next to him again.
I thought that might be coming, so keep going.
Yeah. I was Germany, and he was in France, and Riaz was in England, and then Doug Moore was in Russia. And something that I found very interesting to watch was just how Doug Moore warps a board, bends it to his will. And that was a very, very, very tough board. Adam Silverman was in Austria. Everyone on that board was just excellent. And what happened was Doug really dictated the game. So he in Russia, he got out to 8 centers. Everyone was kind of hemming. It played a little bit like a top board, hemming and hawing. No one wanted to commit. And because he stuck his head up a little too high, I supported my opponent at the time, Riaz, into Scandinavia to cut him down to 6. And then I took both the Scandinavian dots in the next year and was able to draw. I think I drew on 8, or it was 6 and Liam was on 7, or 8 and Liam was on 9. I don't remember, but huge kudos to Liam for drawing on that board. And that was a board, there really was a lot of play left in it. I felt like I could have improved my position. However, with Doug there, with Adam there, two right next to me, two extremely good players, it seemed better to take the points I had, not push it. And again, we were all very happy to be done with that board and go to bed at a reasonable time.
Yeah, Doug is ridiculously good, and it becomes clear when you're playing on the board with him. You're right. It just becomes a center of gravity that warps space-time all around his power.
Definitely.
I know one year he was running late to DixieCon, and I held his spot. And he got there like an hour and a half late and then took over for the sub I had there. And I held his spot so that he wouldn't, miss a round of DixieCon. And then he won the event. And so I got a lot of grief for helping Doug Moore win, which wasn't really my plan. But anyway, tell us about the third round.
Yeah, Doug doesn't need too much help winning.
No,
he can
really
do
don't.
it on his own.
That's right.
The third round, I was next. I was in Turkey. I was leading the tournament coming in. Jason Massbaum was in third, and he's in Russia. Justin Lohr was next to me. And then Harj, which is a player who doesn't travel very often, was in France. And he had like a 16 center Italy or something in the first round. Missed the second round, was still in fifth place in the tournament. That's how strong a player he is. He was in France. And so in that game, I kind of looked at the board and said, well, don't want to work with Jason because we're in first and third and I can't trust him. I need to make sure that Harj doesn't get too big because a France that gets big is really hard to take down later. And I looked at Patrick in Austria and Justin Lohr in Italy and said, okay, one of these two I want to work with if I can. It turned out they both wanted to work with me, which was lucky for me. But Justin Lohr, who, if you haven't seen him, you probably haven't been watching DBN because I think he's played about every tournament this year. I got to play with him a little bit, I believe, at Carnage. Really great guy, really, really strong player. Not sure if he's broken through yet, but if I hear about him winning 2 or 3 tournaments in the near future, I would not be surprised. Maybe he's won something and I just haven't watched enough DBN.
Well, he made the final or the top board of the Virtual Diplomacy League because he was coming into that league as the number 1 seed. But that he did not win the top board, but he's certainly been up there. Yeah,
he's a very good player. He came to me as Italy and said, in 01, I'll support you to Serbia. And he said, but you have to put down 2 armies. And I said, hot diggity, this is my ally. Here we go. Threw down the armies. We were off to the races. I tried not to move too quickly as Turkey. I was worried that if I jumped out, that the West would get their stuff together and go after us. So I grew very slowly. Justin took a couple of my dots without really asking. We had a little bit of a struggle there. But we ended up at 8-8-8 with, I think it was with Craig Mayer at 10. And he was going to get a best country. That's what Craig said, I just want a best England. That's where I want to be. And I told everyone from the beginning, I just want to win the tournament. That's all. I don't care if I have the top of the board. So we got to a point where we were 8-8-8-10. I won the tournament. Craig got a best country. It was a really fun game. Again, there was probably play there. And we had a really good conversation. Harj is a very strong, very aggressive player. And he came over and he said, why aren't you taking these dots? You could get to 12. You might be able to get to 14. Why aren't you going for it? And I said, well, does it really matter if I win the tournament by 3 dots or 6 dots? Not really. No one knows at the end. And so I felt in that game, other than maybe Jason, because I attacked him early. Again, the 6 other players on the board, well, maybe Patrick in Austria and Jason, 5 other players on the board were pretty happy with me. So to have a good result, have an ally that I never had to attack, and then someone else on the board got the result they wanted. I thought it was just a great way to end the tournament.
Well, you end the tournament, you win the tournament. You've still got some goodwill banked with these people for future events is one way to look at it, isn't it?
Exactly.
So what do you think your key to victory was overall then? Was it this business about figuring out what other people want and helping them get it?
Yep. I think there are a couple different ways of looking at negotiation. So I think a lot of players come to the table and they say negotiation is figuring out how to get what I need for me and win. I think negotiation is about finding out the way forward that gets both parties or multiple parties what they want. So I think my negotiation, and people will tell you it wasn't my order writing, because I think in 1901 in my German game, I ordered Berlin to Denmark, which I found out does not work. So I actually had a lot of misorders. I had not the best tactical tournament of my life, but I think this was one of the better diplomatic tournaments I've had. And just being able to negotiate and remembering it's not about getting someone else to do what I want. It's about figuring out what we can do together to advance both of our aims. And I think going in with that attitude really made it work for me.
Let's talk about Cascadia a little more broadly. For those who haven't been to that particular tournament in British Columbia, what's the venue like? What are the players like? What is the vibe?
Yeah. So the vibe, it's very Canadian. Everyone's very polite. It's a really nice group. I haven't mentioned Chris Brand, so huge thank you to Chris Brand, runs the tournament, and everyone who knows Chris, he's just a wonderful person. And then Riaz is there to support him, and Mike Moore, who is a Mountie, Canadian Mountie, is there supporting everybody and giving them rides and really making it work. So the three of them are just a wonderful welcome party. It's in a hotel. You spend most of your time in the conference space. It's not a tournament where we're like going out doing crazy stuff, but that's not what I look for. So I like it a lot. And there's some food really close. So you can walk to a shopping center that has like 6 or 7 food options, which is really nice. I'd say if you're anywhere in the area on the West Coast, I'm coming from Maryland and my round trip ticket was $400 because it's winter and who's flying into BC. So it was affordable. Everyone's great. Highly recommend someone go there and take my crown next year, since I don't think I'll be there.
All right. Well, let's talk about some other events then, because you've been to a lot of different tournaments and events. Compare and contrast something like Cascadia versus other tournaments you've been to. What are the differences? What are the similarities?
Oh, that's a great question. I think thinking back to former Tempest in a Teapots that I've been to in tournaments like that, it's a little less cutthroat. One of the reasons all the games end in 1909. So very, very seldom is someone really looking at a solo. You'd have to just, roll a natural 20 for the D&D folks to get a solo there. So I think a lot of people are looking at it saying, okay, how can I top the board, get a good position, and get ready for the next round? So it was a more kind atmosphere than I think some tournaments. With the scoring system being center-based, I did think that was interesting departure from tournaments like Carnage, where it's position-based. So if you have 8 and I have 7, there's not a huge difference in our scores, right? Whereas in Carnage or something like that, we're a tier apart. So I thought that made cooperative play a bit easier. And I didn't see a lot of stabby one-dot things near the ends of games. It's not as good as DixieCon with the best scoring system in the world, draw-based scoring. But
you're really throwing a marker down there when you say that. But keep going.
I just love DixieCon. Even though the scoring system bit me a little bit, I think this last time, I think it's a great tournament. But if you're on the West Coast and can't make it to DixieCon, I definitely recommend Cascadia.
Well, let's talk about DixieCon a little bit. So you've been to 3 tournaments three tournaments in a row. Did you win all 3 of them?
Just 2 of them, Dave. Just didn't win DixieCon. No.
Didn't win DixieCon. And whose fault is that exactly?
Randy Lawrence Hurt decided that rather than let his opponent David on the other board when he would prefer to throw a solo to Karthik, because Karthik hasn't won enough things recently. So I would just like everyone to know that I saw the Hot or Not episode out there. Randy Lawrence, not hot. Definitely not.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we got that on the record. Well, what other, and you won Carnage, am I right? So
yes,
you're really on a tear here. Where are you going next?
DixieCon. I'm done. I'm not making it to Worlds. We're running, and I'll put something out about this. I'm going to plug myself. Our beloved dog died of canine lymphoma a year and a half ago. And so we run a charity event in April, and it's the week after Worlds, so I can't make it. But I'm going to be putting out, if anyone would like to run a virtual 5K along with our 5K we're doing, and then donate whatever you want. I'm going to put that out to the universe. So that's what I'll be doing. But I wish everybody except for Randy great luck at Worlds in San Francisco.
Send me a link to, or something, some contact information, something about your 5K, and I'll put it in the show notes for this interview.
Great. Thank you.
Because I think that would be good. Well, I think there's maybe a little bit of news, face-to-face circuit news that you might want to spring on us here. That's going to be good news for all of us. So let's hear it.
Yeah. So I'm going to be running a tournament in January of 2026. It's going to be in the Baltimore area near the airport. That means Mark Train goes right there with a shuttle, and also BWI will have a shuttle to the airport. The dates haven't been released. We're looking at Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. So more details will come out, and it will be associated with PTKS. I know you're talking or have talked to Scott, who's really doing a ton of great work bringing PTKS back. So we'll be working together and hope to see you all out there. I think we're getting a really good rate on the hotel. So
I think you mean Phillip, but yes, we have an interview with. Yeah, we have an interview with Phillip in this same episode of Deadline. So there'll be folks that will be watching that, and it's time to get excited about DC area diplomacy again, isn't it?
Sure is. And Scott Bass is the guy I went to college with. Yes, Phillip Bass is doing some great work.
All right. Any final thoughts for our audience here, David? Again, congratulations on your result at Cascadia and your result at Carnage. And wait, I cannot congratulate you on this past year's Dixicon result. But you've won Dixicon before. So maybe it's time for somebody else. Any final thoughts for the audience?
Just keep going to tournaments. As I'm starting to run a tournament, I can't say enough about the folks who have been running all these tournaments for us for years. It's a ton of work. Support your tournament runners, help them out, clean up the room so they don't have to.
Amen to that one. Amen to that one.
So just thank you, and really hope you all have a ton of fun at Worlds. I know Adam's going to be putting on a great event.
Yeah, he will. All right, David, thank you so much for being on Deadline again.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, feel free to send us an email at info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixicon.com. To review all of our broadcast offerings, visit our website, www.diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.